Hello, hello. Let me see.
That's why he's the rabbi. I'm just the lowly talk show host. They didn't tell me to turn it on. On my set, when I walk on the mic, just so you know. Mine was on. When you come on my set, did you turn your microphone on? It was already on first. I want better treatment next time I show up.
Steve Leder is my friend. Somebody asked me the other day how long Steve and I had known each other, and I said to them, when Steve and I first got together 30 plus years ago, and started our friendship, neither one of us had any suits. We had a whole lot of hair. Now we have no hair, but a whole lot of suits. So we've been on a journey together for 3 decades now. It is always my great joy to be in conversation with you, either in this temple, at your kitchen table, at a restaurant, wherever we might be. I just enjoy your company and your wisdom. When I got this text, I want to jump right in. When I got this text, I couldn't wait to get into it. In part because suffering is something that I have always wrestled with. You know a bit of my own story. When I was just a 12-year-old kid, my father, in a moment of rage, lost his temper. Long story, I'll tell very, very briefly because I don't want to break out in tears to start the conversation. I was 12 years old, my father lost his temper, and over something that I was accused of having done that I didn't do, knew nothing about. My father was so enraged, he didn't ask me about it, didn't talk to me. He stormed in the house based on what he'd heard in the street and gave me the beating of a lifetime. The beating was so severe that it landed me in the hospital in traction for almost 2 weeks. Broken bones, broken body, say nothing of a broken spirit. And since the age of 12, I'm now 53, since the age of 12, I still wrestle with what that suffering meant and means, and frankly will mean for the rest of my own journey. So suffering is a subject matter that always grabs me and shakes me and won't let me loose in some ways. So when Steve decided to write this book about suffering, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it because I know how erudite he can be in his sermons and in the words that he shares with us. So I got the book, read it, called Steve and said, you got to come on the show. And so I guess a week or two ago, he was a guest on my PBS show. That's the Tavis Smiley show on PBS every night at 11 o'clock on PBS SoCal. We call that a shameless plug. Thank you very much. So Steve and I had this conversation initially on television, and I kind of just want to give that backstory because I want to pick up where we left off, kind of like as I was saying. So when I last saw you on the set of our television show, one of the last questions I asked you is where I want to start today. I asked you a question about suffering, and I went the other direction, as you'll recall. I said to you, if you were the rabbi for Harvey Weinstein, if you were the rabbi for Bernie Madoff, what would you say to them about suffering? Is it transformative for them? What are the lessons to be learned? I want to expand that out a little bit more today because since that conversation a couple weeks ago, we've got other names to add to this list. Louis C.K. and the list goes on and on and on. But it seems to me that there are two sides to this equation. One is those who are suffering because of who and how they victimized. Say nothing of the persons who are the victims of their abuse. I don't want to color the question too much, but I want to start where we left off, talking about suffering on both sides of that coin because everybody in the country right now is talking about it in some ways, just suffering having to read this stuff every single day. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And thank you for being here, my friend. Look, for the record, Harvey Weinstein is not a member of the congregation. But if he was, and came to me, in fact, I would have reached out and called. Anytime I read something in the newspaper about one of our members or hear about something that involves a terrible mistake or series of mistakes or sin, you use the word you prefer, transgression, that has come to light and it resulted in terrible public shame, I always call. I'm the rabbi, I'm not the judge, and I'm not the jury. I'm the rabbi. And it's not in my nature to turn my back on anyone who, before I know whether or not this person is serious about grasping this opportunity. And that's what I would talk about with someone like Harvey Weinstein. To make a long, probably hour counseling session in my office very short, I would say something like, look, if this isn't bottom for you, what is? And if you can see how low you have gone, how much suffering you have caused, how blind you were to your own self, if you can't see that, then there's no opportunity here for you. But if you can, then this may be the single best and last opportunity you have to change your life. And you can change your life. And then we would talk about how to do that. The reason I'm so interested in this subject of pain, physical and emotional, is because it's all well and good, frankly, to talk about a loving God. But it's also true that pain is a great teacher, and pain is the only thing that forces people to change. Success doesn't change anyone, frankly. There's a joke which I used to think was about the French, and my friend Bob Bookman, just knows where everything originated from, emails his friend who edits the Yale Book of Quotations, and the next thing you know, I have a scholarly treatise on the fact that it wasn't the French that this was about, it was the Jews, of course. So the saying is, the Jews are like everyone else, just more so. And I would say that success just makes us more so. It's just an incentive to keep doing the same thing. It's only pain that can be disruptive enough to force us to change. And I would say to Harvey Weinstein, I would say to Louis C.K., I would say to anybody who has done anything that is not in keeping with their true best selves, I know this is painful. I know that shame is painful. I know you've embarrassed yourself. You've embarrassed your family. You've embarrassed your children. You may go to jail. Use this pain to change your life. You know, Dostoevsky said his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering. So I would say to Harvey Weinstein, can you make the rest of your life worthy of this shame and embarrassment and despicable behavior? And of course, then at a certain point, it's really up to him whether he grasps this as an opportunity or not. That I can't say. But I would definitely frame it as an opportunity. I got a letter once from a guy who grew up here at the temple and was a member on his own, who had a terrible gambling problem, and he ended up using a lot of funds illegally to cover his gambling debts, and he went to jail. He's still in jail. And he wrote to me, and he talked to me about what jail had done for him, and he said it had stripped away everything and enabled him to see himself for the first time. And that's the opportunity.
There are, in this audience today, there aren't a bunch of Harvey Weinsteins or Louis C.K.'s, but we are all human. We are not human and divine. Dr. King used to say there's some evil in the best of us and some good in the worst of us. So again, another unorthodox question, then we get to the easier stuff. Because we're human and not human and divine, every one of us has made mistakes. Every one of us, if we are willing to be honest, has caused someone else to suffer. What do we do with the pain, the regret, disappointment we feel in ourselves about the pain that we have caused others, particularly and especially if we don't know how to right the wrong, or if the person who we pained is no longer living.
Right.
Talk to us about how we deal with the suffering that we have caused, because we always tend to think of suffering as what somebody did to us.
Right. No.
Yeah.
To be betrayed is painful, but it is also painful to be the betrayer. Very painful. And I have to answer this in two ways. There's a piece in the book called Hurt and Run. And it has to do with, some of you were probably here when I talked about this a few years ago on Yom Kippur. It has to do with two families in the congregation, both of whom had a loved one who was a pedestrian killed by a driver. In the first case, it was a hit and run. Took over a year to find the perpetrator, and the family went through hell in that year. Their 25-year-old son died in the ICU at UCLA with a river of his friends streaming through the ICU to say goodbye to him before they turned off the respirator. I was there. And in the second case, an elderly man was hit in a crosswalk by a woman. He's a member of the congregation. I think his wife is here today, right now. A woman was fumbling for her cell phone, and she hit him in the crosswalk. He died a few days later in the hospital. But the woman who hit him did everything right, everything she could, stopped, took responsibility, went through civil and legal cases, gave lectures in schools to children about the dangers of texting and driving, did hundreds of hours of community service, did what she could, and then made a call to the widow of this man and asked if she could see her because she wanted to apologize. So this woman called me, said, the woman who killed my husband has asked to see me. Do I have to see her? And I said, you do. She said, will you be there with me? And I said, I will. And then we met beforehand. And I talked with her and her son about the stages of forgiveness laid out by the greatest rabbi of all, the Rambam, Moses Maimonides, who figured this out over 800 years ago. And there are 4 stages. The first is, whatever it is you're doing that's hurtful, sinful, etc., you stop, right? Put the phone in the glove compartment from now on. Put the bottle down, right? Whatever it is, stop. Secondly, confess out loud. There's a tremendous psychological difference between thinking something and saying something out loud. Very different. Confess to God and, if possible, to the person you've harmed. And then change your life and make a vow never to do it again. Change your life. And finally, if you are in a situation where you could repeat that sin and you do not, then you have achieved what the Rambam called tshuva shlema, complete repentance. Now here's one of the interesting things about the Rambam's view on this. If a person has sincerely gone through these 4 steps and asks for forgiveness from the person he or she has harmed 3 times and is refused 3 times, the sin is then upon the victim. So, and you're right, very few people are Harvey Weinsteins or Bernie Madoffs, or probably none of us in this room, I hope, will ever hurt someone to that degree in a car. But as I say in that piece in the book, we may not hit and run, but we all hurt and run. We all leave other people's feelings like roadkill behind. All of us. We've all done it. I've done it. We've all done it. So let's go back to my office now, and I want to tell you about arguably the most moving thing I've ever seen in my life. So the woman who killed this man comes into my office. His widow and son are already there. We're seated down. She comes in. She's very frail, frightened. She sits down and she begins to speak. And she says, I am sorry, and I was wrong. I was so wrong. Now, saying I am sorry is okay, but saying I was wrong, those are the three hardest words for most human beings to say. I was wrong. Saying I was wrong is a much higher degree of culpability and responsibility. There's no I'm sorry, meaning I'm sorry I got caught, I'm sorry that happened, I'm sorry you feel that I fill in the blank. I was wrong. Changes everything. So she said, I was wrong, and I'm so sorry, and I've done what I can, and can you please forgive me? And then the son is this big burly guy. He says to her, can I ask you a question? She says, of course. And he says to her, how's your son? He was so scared when the accident happened. He was in the car with her. How's your son? And she said, he's okay, better. And then he said, can I give you a hug? And they hugged. And then the widow, this woman who's a Holocaust survivor, gets up, walks over to this frail, wounded woman. She cups her face in her hands. She looks at her and she says, God bless you, and kissed her. And we were all weeping. So there is a path. There is a path for pain to change people's lives. And is it okay or not? Helen and Bobby, would you stand up? They're here tonight.
Thank you for doing that, for sharing that. Thank you for being courageous enough to stand up and let Steve acknowledge you. There are a couple of things that, that come to mind as I sat listening to that story, which was arresting for me. One, and you give us a bit of a treatise on this. Talk to us about the suffering that we endure because we can't let go of what was done to us. That's the flip side of the question I just asked. The suffering that we endure because we can't
forgive.
Exactly.
We can't forgive.
There you go.
Yeah. We can't forgive. Well, look, there are a few things to say about forgiveness. First of all, let's assume the person has gone through these steps and is truly repentant, right? And we still can't forgive. That then begins to say something about us more than about the other. And let me also say that forgiving does not mean forgetting. A lot of people are under the assumption that Judaism and Christianity function under this idea that forgiveness is something you grant to the perpetrator. That is not the case. Forgiveness is actually for the victim. Forgiveness is what enables the victim to stop carrying this poison. And forgiving is not forgetting. You don't have to forget. You don't have to trust again. This is about whether or not the thing you are holding, as I said on Rosh Hashanah this past year, hold it up to the light and ask yourself, does this bitterness bring me joy? Does this weight bring me joy? And if the answer is no, it's time to forgive and not necessarily to forget. I paraphrase the Buddha in the book who said, in life, we are not punished for our anger, we are punished by our anger. Think about that for a moment. We are not punished for our anger, we are punished by our anger. You know, holding on to this anger is like swallowing poison and expecting it to kill someone else. So forgiveness is for the victim. And the other thing, which, look, there are unforgivable sins. There are. But when people come to me wounded and angry and they can't forgive, there are a couple things I remind them of. The first is something that Jonathan Safran Foer in his relatively new book, Here I Am, talks about. He says in the book, he makes this observation: everyone is wounded. Everyone. The person sitting next to you right now is in pain, is wounded. All of us. And remembering a person's wounds makes it easier to forgive. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is, in a much gentler way than this, much gentler, are you so perfect? Have you never hurt another? Have you never slammed the door? Have you never gossiped? Have you never been thoughtless? Have you never failed to reach out to a friend who you knew was suffering? Begin with yourself and try to treat other people the way you hope to be treated when you do something remarkably hurtful or stupid.
Let me confess that you're always on my prayer list. You're on my short list. And sometimes when we talk and I get a sense of what's going on in your world, you move a little higher up on the prayer list.
It's that obvious, huh?
Yeah. I push you up higher on my prayer list every now and again because I am concerned. I'm saying this to you as your friend, as your brother. And you're the rabbi, but you're not the only person that is in this line of work, which is to help heal other people. So I know there are folk in this audience who are healers as much as you are in their own way, Steve. Personally, professionally. But I wonder if I might ask you a personal question, which is how you, as you write about in this book, you share so many anecdotes, so many beautiful anecdotes and stories in the text as you've done today. How do you hear all that? How do you intake all that? How do you digest all that and not get caught up in a state of melancholia? How do you deal with all the suffering that you have to counsel and advise people through and not allow it to become a burden to you?
It's impossible not to be honest. And it's one of those things that you don't even recognize the weight of until it's too late. Or you don't even recognize the weight of until it stops for a little while. You know, and that's when you realize the constant stress and pressure of the calls that come in. One came in an hour before I left the house for today, for this event. So I'm going to be, more open than I suppose. I don't know. I just am. After my spinal surgery, a woman who was a trustee of the temple called me and she said, well, you broke your back for the temple. And of course, medically it was incorrect. But her words, that sentence just shot through me. And I had to get a lot of help. First of all, I have an amazing wife. Who's here?
Where's Betsy?
She's right there. I have an amazing wife who does understand. And after my spinal surgery, I got depressed, partly because of the opioids and the steroids, but also because I realized how much I was carrying metaphorically. And I got bitter, and I got help. You know, I reached out to a very talented psychiatrist. I reached out to my...
Bitter about what?
The sacrifices I had made to take care of so many people. The toll it took on me physically and emotionally. The amount of time. And I got help. You know, there's another piece in the book that's entitled "The Prisoner Cannot Free Himself." The prisoner cannot free himself. This episode in my life forced me for the first time in my life to reach out for help, because I couldn't get out of it myself. And I'm a much better, healthier person. But I didn't do it alone. And I'm not embarrassed to talk about it. And you know, cliches are cliches because they're true. So this cliche of the wounded healer, there's a reason that people who do what I do are become wounded healers, because it's true. That's what happens. But I also know that deep in me, there's a helping gene. There's a gene in me. I'm the guy who runs toward trouble, not away from it. When I know people are suffering, I show up. And at some level, it's because I want to. I'm built that way. That's my calling. I remember in fourth grade, I was in fourth grade, Mrs. Hollingsworth, Aquila Elementary School in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. You were there too? Cedar Manor, okay. St. Louis Park. So I actually think it was Miss Hollingsworth. And there was a girl in our class, I don't know, in fourth grade, what are you, like 9, 10? There was a girl in our class who was clearly emotionally troubled. I'm going to make up a name. I remember her name, but just in case there's someone else here from St. Louis Park, I have to be careful. So I'm going to call her Susie, okay? But Susie was clearly troubled. And I wanted to go to Miss Hollingsworth and say, you know, could I just talk to her for a few minutes? I think I can help her. Now, I didn't do it, but I fantasized about it. I really did. I wanted to help her. And that's because there's something in my DNA that's who I am. Now, making peace with that, being honest about that, is part of the healing that comes. That this is your calling, and this is what you were built for, and this is what you were made for, and knowing that makes it a little easier to do. So that's maybe a little bit more than you wanted to know about peeking behind the curtain.
No, never too much. Your story, though, did remind me of our mutual friend Cornel West, who, when he was in elementary school, Cornel West is from California, in Sacramento, when Cornel was in elementary school up north, and he got kicked out of 3 or 4 elementary schools.
I'm sure he did. Yeah.
He eventually got kicked out of the whole district, and now he's Cornel West. But he kept getting kicked out of school because, like you, he would always run toward the problem, and he kept getting kicked out of school because he literally would steal the lunches from the kids who had too much lunch to give to the poor kids who didn't have any lunch.
Yeah.
His mom and dad kept saying, Cornel, it's not your job to beat people up and take their lunches.
Yeah.
He said, I didn't take it. I just took it. I cut it in half. I passed it around. He's like, she said, you ain't Jesus feeding the children and the wives. And, you know. But that story reminded me of Cornel West, who, like Steve Leder, likes to run toward toward the trouble. I want to go inside the book, and I should mention in less than 30 minutes, I took my watch off, less than 30 minutes, there's a microphone here, and so I know in LA, everybody wants to be a talk show host anyway. So in less than 30 minutes, any questions or comments you have for Rabbi Leder, you can step to the microphone, and I'll let you know when to do that in just a little bit. But I want to go inside the text now. What I love about this book is, it's kind of hard to do both of these at the same hand, the book is broken up into 3 parts. And I love the way Steve did this, and there are essays essentially under each section. The first section is called Surviving. The second section is called Healing and Growing. Surviving, Healing, and Growing. And there are wonderful pieces under each section. I want to just kind of pull out a few things that struck me, one in each section, and get you to kind of expound upon it, okay, if you might. So from the initial section, the Surviving section, there's a line in here. This is the piece where you talk about the farmer. Mm-hmm. The piece is called the root of all blessings.
Yeah.
ROUTE.
Right.
And there's a line in this passage where you say, and I quote, a lot of blessings are actually rooted in suffering. A lot of blessings are actually rooted in suffering. To some of us, that sounds oxymoronic, but I'm sure you can explain.
Well, okay, let's start with what the book is not and what is not my intention. It is not my intention to idealize or glorify suffering. I had a very dear friend, Betsy knew pretty well too, named Paul Miller. You remember Paul, actually, back when we were doing the Crossing the Line programs. Paul had 3 different cancers. And the 3rd cancer, when he was dying, I went to visit him in the hospital, and he looked at me from his hospital bed. He said, "You know, Steve, this much character I don't need." So I'm not for a moment trying to posit that, oh, this actually isn't suffering. This is actually all for the good. Come on, cheer up. Nevertheless, you ask most people what the best thing is in his, or ask any man, any woman, what is the best or among the best things in your life? What was the most important thing that ever happened to you in your life? And they'll tell you, oh, it was the birth of my child, or oh, it was marrying my wife, or oh, it was, starting my business, or whatever the answer is. Oh, it was stopping drinking. And then you start to trace backward. This is why I called it the root, ROUTE, of all blessings. You start moving backward in time. Well, how did that all begin? And more times than not, it began in some terrible form of adversity. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that you have to see these things, if you possibly can, as an opportunity to change your life for the better. By the way, because you have to. You have to, or this will ruin your life. And when you get to that point, then that's why the book is called More Beautiful Than Before. You start to discover that, in a way, we're actually more whole when something is missing. We're actually more whole when we're a little bit broken. I know I could never have written this book had I not suffered what I suffered. Forget that I'm the witness to other people suffering. It didn't teach me that much. So I guess a way to think of it, there's this movie, this is a movie title, or I would have called the book this, but I didn't want to get sued. There's a movie called Collateral Beauty. And that's how I think of these things, as they have collateral beauty.
Your book is better than the movie, by the way.
Thanks. I understand it wasn't a very good movie.
I saw the movie, yes. Your book is better and your title is better.
Yeah, so these things, you talk to World War II veterans about what World War II did for them. Changed their lives. When do you discover good health? Your health. When does that matter? I'll tell you when it matters, when you lose it. This is in the book, so I've already embarrassed Betsy, so I might as well do it tonight too, and then say I was wrong. Betsy and I have been married for almost 32 years. We've been through a lot together. She had surgery about 1.5 years ago and came home with 2 drains. I have never felt closer to her or more intimate with her than when I emptied those drains and measured that liquid. That's intimate. And that's an intimacy born of vulnerability and pain. And it's its own kind of blessing. Blessings just don't come for free. My Yiddish-speaking grandmother would have said it this way, God doesn't give with both hands. And that's the truth.
From the second section of this book called Healing, I want to actually read this paragraph. I have the book is in hardback, as I mentioned, the minute the galley came to my office, I took it home and started reading it immediately, marked it all up, so I've got stuff all in this thing, so it's just easier for me to use my galley than the beautiful hard copy that you're going to buy when you leave here today.
Hard copies.
Hard copies. It's holiday season.
Hanukkah's coming.
Let me try something. Church say amen. All right, just check it. Put a little black church on
We'll
y'all.
take all we can get.
Now, you know what the black church amen said? Amen means you agree. So everybody who said amen had better buy a book when they leave here today.
Books. Did you say books?
Plural, yes, plural. Holiday season, gifts. Here's a paragraph from a section called Life is Long. This particular piece really, I mean, Steve, it arrested me in well, I'll read the paragraph. You'll see why. One paragraph from this essay. Believe me, I am not campaigning for it, nor does the job exist. But if there was such a job as chief rabbi of those who suffer, and I held that job, here's what I would say to the victims of pain. I would remind them that life is long enough to start again, to rebuild, to take more pictures, to create more memories, to heal. I would remind them that the day begins at midnight, the darkest hour, because it helps to live with faith that darkness will somehow be followed by light. I would remind them that hope begins when the moon is new in its darkest phase, just a slim crescent of light against the black sky. I would remind them that faith in that which we cannot see through our tears is the truest faith of all. I had never processed. In our vernacular, we say all the time the exact opposite. Life is short. Life is so short. We find ourselves using that phraseology all the time. And you backed me up with this piece. Well, maybe it is, but life is also long. I want one of you might expound on that a little bit, because we do have the time to navigate our way through the suffering.
Yes. Yeah. And, the first essay in the book is called When You Must, You Can. And it's true. You have no idea, and actually some of you do because I've said it to you, how many times when I pull up to the cemetery and park in the clergy spot and walk into that chapel, how many times I'm greeted by a family member, a spouse, parent of a child, and they just look at me and they say, I can't do this. I can't. And I put my arm around them and I say, you can, and you will. And I'm here. Walk with me. And they do get through it. Not one person has failed to walk. And life has a remarkable way of reasserting itself. I'm at the house of mourning after the funeral, and out of the corner of my eye, I see this terribly bereaved person, actually really enjoying that piece of chocolate. Or, smiling at a grandchild. Or even laughing at an old story. And I know they're going to be okay. Not the same, but the sun really does rise again. It really does. And having faith in that is frankly the only way forward. So we see light through our pupil, the darkest part of the eye. If you think about that for a moment, we actually see light through our pupil, which is the darkest part of our eye. I'll tell you an amazing thing. I didn't want to get too Jewy in the book because it alienates some people or it just kind of shuts people out. But I'll tell you this amazing little piece of Jewish law from the Talmud. There's a blessing that's said over the new moon each month. And the Talmud requires a blind person to recite the blessing over the new moon. Now, why would the rabbis require someone to bless that which he or she cannot see? And to me, that's a very powerful and instructive way to live. Is faith in ourselves and our own capacity to move forward. And again, this is so important, this idea that the prisoner cannot free himself. When you're suffering, be vulnerable enough to reach out. None of us can get through these things alone.
So this last section of the book, and by the way, in about 5 minutes, there's a microphone here. After Steve gives his answer, we can take some of your questions and comments if you want to join the conversation. So the last section of the book is called Growing. And there's a wonderful piece here called Fix Something. Fix Something. And just because I want to needle you just a little bit, and I've read it, so it's not fair to me. I mean, it's not fair to the audience because I know the whole story. But let me press you and push you on this. So the piece is called Fix Something. And yet, in the middle of the piece, or near the end of the piece, you write this. So you're telling me to fix something. But then you say, oh, I know not everything that is broken can be fixed. I know that some families are so dysfunctional for so long that nothing can save them. Some friendships can never be rescued. Some betrayals cannot be overcome. Some social problems are so deeply embedded that they can never be uprooted. Some injuries to our bodies or our souls cannot be fully mended. As my grandmother would say in her broken English, you got some splaining to do. You tell me to fix it, but then you tell me all the things that I can't fix.
Fix something, not everything.
Okay.
Look, I do think that growing through pain there's a dichotomous tension that results in the growth, a paradoxical tension. Okay, it is this combination, which, by the way, everyone in recovery, which is a lot of people in this room, everyone in a 12-step program understands this. That there's this dichotomous tension that leads to wisdom. What is the tension? Fixing what can be broken and making peace with what cannot be fixed. It's both. Because for example, I've had to make peace with the things I can no longer do with my body. Things I loved to do. And I've had to take better care of my body to fix what I can. In a family, I so many times in my office talk to people about being realistic about what a relationship can be, with a sibling, a parent, a child, and what it can never be. Both are important to know what can be repaired and to know what you have to make peace with when broken. There's this great story toward the end of the book about Yitzhak Perlman, who I think everybody here knows who Yitzhak Perlman is and knows that he suffered from polio since he was a young child. And this is a story about Yitzhak Perlman comes out on stage to play a concerto and one of the strings breaks on his violin. And he's such a genius that he reconfigures the fingerings in his mind with just 3 strings and plays the entire concerto perfectly. And the audience, when he's done, goes crazy. Crazy. And he eventually quiets the audience and he says to them, it is my job to make music with what is left. It is my job to make music with what is left. Now that is a perfect story about fixing what can be broken and making peace with what will never be. You know, death is this way. The poet called death the absence that is forever present. I've never heard death described better. The absence that is forever present. And that requires a peacemaking. Right? And that's why I think, particularly for men, you know, Tavis, I don't know if you remember this or not, but not long after my surgery, you and I were here talking, and you had just had surgery on your foot. So neither one of us could walk very well. And the room was empty. And we sat up in the balcony, two of us, two old friends. And we talked about getting older and our bodies and making peace with all of this and seeing this as a midlife opportunity instead of a midlife crisis. Because it can go either way. So you know, it's one of those classic rabbi stories. So many of you know this joke, but you know, these two men come with a dispute to the rabbi, and the rabbi listens to the first guy, he says, you know, you're right. The rabbi listens to the second guy, he says, you know, you're right. And they leave confused, and then his assistant says, Rabbi, you said he was right, and you said he was right. They can't both be right. And the rabbi says, you know what? You're right. So, you know, you wait long enough, the old jokes are funny again. So, you're right, yes. In other words, they're both true. Fix something, and some things can't be fixed. And making peace with that, making music with what's left, that is a beautiful life.
Speaking of the rabbi's office, so today you get a chance to talk to him, to ask, to comment. You ain't got to call Samantha to get on the schedule. You ain't got to beg Betsy for extra time. You can just step to the microphone here and sound off whatever question or comment you have. Don't be shy while you're making your way down to ask those questions or make those comments. How did you get the title for the book? It's a great title, More Beautiful Than Before. How'd you come up with that?
Okay.
Come on down, ladies and gentlemen.
So initially,
Price is Right.
I wanted to call the book Weeds Bring Yellow Birds because of that story in the book about how when I stopped fighting the weeds on the back hill in my house because of my surgery, all these gangly weeds sprung up, and then I noticed there was this flock of beautiful little yellow birds in these weeds that were never there before because I kept hacking these weeds back. So I originally wanted to call it Weeds Bring Yellow Birds. In other words, that out of our brokenness, something beautiful emerges. But the editors said, you know, it's too much explaining. You have to have a title that's self-evident. So there's a line in the book that says that pain can make us gentler, wiser, and more beautiful than before. So my agent, actually, Rebecca Friedman, suggested that. And then they said, well, it's too long. And then we hit on More Beautiful Than Before. And we actually, only in LA, they wanted to call it More Beautiful Than Before, How Pain Transforms Us. And I said, half the people in LA are going to think it's a book about cosmetic surgery. It's true. So we had to settle on suffering because, you know.
I knew there was a story there. I know that was going to be the story, but it's quite hilarious. Yes, sir. Thank you for your question or comment in advance. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for the book.
Jeffrey, can we get this mic on?
Could Tavis help me?
Yeah, don't ask me help.
We're just punking you, Mark. Do we have Jeffrey? Are you here?
Try it again. I'll get my mic.
Hello?
There we go.
Going back to forgiveness, just so I know for future reference, what are the unforgivable sins?
Oh, so the question is, what are the unforgivable sins in Judaism? They are sins for which the victim is not available to grant forgiveness. Murder, for example, is an unforgivable sin because the victim can't forgive you. So there are sins which can't be forgiven because an apology can't be sought. And murder is, of course, the most profound of them. Yeah.
Questions, comments? Come on. Got a shy group here today. Here we go.
Earlier, you talked about forgiveness if the person that hurt you went through all the steps or what have you.
Yeah.
What about when the person doesn't do that?
They
Because
do not deserve your forgiveness.
You still have
Period.
granted?
No.
No?
Oh, the question is, what about a person?
He heard it.
I heard it. The question was, what about a person who doesn't go through these 4 steps? You have no idea how many times people come to me and say, so-and-so did such and such to me, and I just can't get over it. And I'll say, well, what has she done to apologize to help you get over it? Nothing. I said, then she doesn't merit your forgiveness. You don't have to forgive. You do not have to forgive that person. Now, you need to decide whether you want to live with bitterness in your heart or not. But technically, you are not obligated to forgive.
See, let me press you on that, though. It seems to violate, again, come on down if you have questions or comments, but it seems to violate what you were suggesting earlier, which is that we forgive for ourselves, not the other person.
Yes, but it's optional at that point. Okay, if the person doesn't go through these steps, you're not obligated to forgive. You may choose to do that. You may choose to say, look, I'm not perfect, or I know how wounded she is. She has her own problems. That's up to you. But you are not, I'm speaking technically now, according to Jewish law, you are not obligated to forgive.
But how did forgiveness, maybe I need a lesson in Judaism, but how did forgiveness even get connected to a notion of obligation? I'm missing why are those two things even linked together?
Because one has to merit forgiveness. If one is not repentant, one doesn't merit forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't free. Why should it be?
See,
If it was free,
I'm
Tavis,
going to press you on that.
if it was free,
Yeah.
if you had no obligation to change your behavior in order to merit my forgiveness, why should anyone change their behavior?
Because I am not forgiving you for you. Again, I'm forgiving me for myself. Let me put it this way.
That's a hard thing to do when the person who did it
I didn't say it was easy.
is unrepentant.
I didn't say it was easy.
And you're not obligated.
Okay.
You may choose to.
I didn't say it was easy. Here's my best retort to that. So I have to bring in my Christendom.
By the way, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
You don't know us.
Yeah, I've got to bring in my Christendom to respond to your Judaism.
Well, right.
All right.
Yes.
So Jesus is hanging on the cross, as you well know, between the 2 thieves. He forgives them, and his prayer is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So Jesus didn't forgive them because he was obligated. He forgave them in spite of themselves.
He was not obligated to. This Christian notion of forgiveness is very different than the Jewish concept of forgiveness. The Jewish concept of forgiveness, mandatory, required forgiveness, requires true repentance. This is what Yom Kippur is all about. The Yom Kippur liturgy says, for sins between God and man and God, human beings and God, women and God, Yom Kippur atones. But for sins between one human being and another, Yom Kippur does not atone until they have made peace with each other.
You know what the moral of the story is, right? I should have switched to Judaism a long time ago. I've forgiven a whole lot of folk who didn't deserve it or merit it.
I will say to you,
I should have.
and you don't feel good about it, right?
Converted a long time ago.
The Christian notion of forgiveness feels very strange to me. I don't get it. It doesn't, in my view, do much to heal the wound and heal the world if people don't have to accept responsibility for what they've done to merit forgiveness.
But here's one last. I'm sorry, I'm coming in 1 second. But here's the thing, though. Let me take you and everybody else back to this moment that the whole world witnessed, and everybody was in awe of this moment. And it ain't happened once; it's happened repeatedly in the course of Black history, which is American history. You recall Dylann Roof walking in that church? All them black folk he killed in that church. And at his trial, all the family said, we forgive him. He didn't ask for it. He didn't merit it, but they forgave him. And the whole world took notice that it was arresting to people.
Yeah, well,
to see how in that moment,
Tavis, the Jews are still pissed at Pharaoh.
I ain't got to come back for that. I ain't got to come back for that. Moving on. Yeah.
We're not that easy. Have you not met my mother?
That's why. I'm telling you, man, I should have converted a long time ago, but I just, Jesus. All right. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, man.
Rabbi, one of the other things that you talk about in your book is the importance of when you are having pain, that other people connect with you and help you to get through it.
Right.
And one of the things that I think a lot of people feel is, what can I say? What can I do?
Yes.
And I think that one of the things that you have mentioned to me is the importance of prayer in terms of connecting with the people. And just yesterday at Temple, we said the Misha Berach prayer for the ill, and I said a prayer because the wife of one of my friends, and they're very religious Catholics, she has cancer. And so, I know you're not supposed to use your cell phones in Temple, but I sent a text message. Hi, David. At Temple tonight, I said a prayer of healing for Manuela. And he sent me a text message back. Much appreciated, Dan. We need all possible help on this one. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. It does help. I want to give a fuller answer to Dan's question. I have people really call very often and say, Rabbi, my friend was just diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and I'm going to visit him. I don't know what to say. What I tell people generally is, you just have to show up. By the way, this happens to me all the time. Before I pull into the parking lot at Cedars or UCLA, I know where I'm headed, I know what the diagnosis is, and I say to myself, I don't know what I'm going to say, but I walk in the door. So I say to you, to all of us who have friends, people we love who are suffering, don't worry about what to say. Just show up. Walk in the door and the rest will take care of itself, I promise you. It will unfold because the very act of walking through the door is immediately addressing the most painful part of pain, which is this feeling of isolation and abandonment, that you're alone in it, that no one cares, no one understands, no one's reaching in. And all of that goes away when you just walk in the door. I often don't know what I'm going to say, but I show up, and that's a lot.
Let's try to get a couple more questions in. I'm watching my time because you got a bunch of books to sign. I don't want to
Come down, Scott. Come on.
Two or three more questions, and we'll let you sign some books. Yes, ma'am.
So if two people wrong each other simultaneously,
Uh-oh.
and only,
Is this a story problem?
nah,
Okay.
and only one asks for forgiveness, how do you handle that impasse if it's at the same time?
Okay, so let me understand. So two people
Two people, major issue
between them?
between them.
Right.
Both are hurt. One person asks for the forgiveness, the other doesn't. How do you get through that impasse?
One person so you and I heard each other, and
You turn your back and you don't respond to me. You're
Right.
not, you don't say you're sorry. I come to you, very apologetic, and it's.
you're sorry for your part, and I'm too proud or arrogant or narcissistic to apologize.
Sounds just like you, Steve.
Yeah.
Just like you.
And so the question is then, how do you,
What's the
I would say to you-
language for the impasse?
it may never be coming,
Okay.
and then it becomes about who you are, not who the other person is, and that you've done everything you can do. There are 5 words that are really powerful that I sometimes say to people as a real answer to you, Linda, is you can only do so much. And that's the truth. You've done what you can do. and you can live with yourself. And, you know, some friendships end, but life is long, and we make new friends.
Yeah, the last passage we read from the book, is it Linda? The last passage we read was that line, some friendships can never be rescued. And that thing hit me when I read it in Steve's book, because I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to have a lifelong friend and something goes awry and you do everything you can to try to rescue that friendship. And the other person just doesn't, they can't come around. And when they can't come around, then you know, as Steve said, life goes on, you keep moving. But it's a painful thing when you're trying to rescue a friendship and the other person just can't, they can't make the turn. That's about them, it's not about you. That's what I've had to come. Yeah. Okay.
What if you see an injustice and there are other witnesses to the injustice? And perhaps it could be against a child who is helpless and vulnerable. The person who perpetrated this injustice does not feel that it was, has many rationalizations and excuses to forgive himself because he's not even in the realm
Right.
of even thinking he needs to.
This is not an I was wrong kind of person. Yeah.
Never will be. You're aware of it. You know it. You would like to write a letter, which probably would be futile. You'd like to do something so that you do not become part of the infinite number of people that stood idly by.
Well,
You do not want to be accused of standing idly by.
Right.
And you will not be able to forgive yourself if you do not take an action.
But I think the
What do
action,
you
Miriam,
do with your feelings?
I think the action that you should take is with and for the child.
Only for the child.
Yes.
But it still will be lost on deaf ears.
Correct. So let me put it to you this way. This is a bottle of water. You can talk to this bottle of water all day long, today, tomorrow, and the next day, for the rest of your life, and tell it to become a spoon. And at a certain point, you're the fool. And you're going to spend your life in a futile effort to change something that will never be changed. Your role, your value then is to tend to the heart of the victim. That you can do. And to help this person, whoever it is, have a meaningful and beautiful life despite this, despite what will not change. You know, people, for some reason my mind jumps to this, the 10 Commandments, the commandment that about our parents, and people come to me all and say, you know, my father was abusive. And I can't honor the Torah, I can't love him. And I remind them that's not the commandment. The commandment is not to love our parents, it's to honor our parents. And I tell them, you don't have to love your father, you have to lead an honorable life that never brings shame to your family. But you don't have to love this person. You don't have to change this person. Frankly, you don't have to have anything to do with this person if they're entirely unrepentant. The less, the better. You don't have to walk into a punch. Tavis loves boxing, so you don't have to.
You still don't want to walk into a punch.
You don't want to walk into a punch.
No.
It's not required. So I think my place, your place, is with the victim.
Obviously, but what do you do with your frustrated feeling?
Grow up. Some things can't be
Okay.
fixed.
I'm very grown already.
I know. I know how old you are, Miriam, but I'm not telling anyone.
All right, 2 more questions or comments. Yes, sir.
First, thank you both for an amazing afternoon. It's really special. So the concept of more beautiful than before is, we don't all automatically become more beautiful because we've suffered, right?
Right.
And so you've seen a lot of people who, whether it's a bankruptcy or a cancer or a betrayal, they become diminished and they don't get to another place. do you have a sense, I mean, can you tell us why, what distinguishes those who are actually able to arise from that suffering and go to another place and versus those who aren't able to?
Yeah, in other words, some people just either learn nothing or don't grow from it. So I think this kind of falls into two categories. One is there are people with such extraordinarily high pain thresholds that they never change because they never hit bottom. Their bottom is so low they never actually are in enough pain to force them to change in this way. And frankly, I think there's also a difference between happiness and change. You know, happy and beautiful are not the same thing. A lot of people have situations that happen to them that make it very hard to be happy. And one of the things I say in the book is that we can't always be happy, but that doesn't mean we can't be good. And kinder and gentler and wiser. Most people, I think, who really go through a painful experience, real pain, there are positive effects, but that doesn't mean they're, happy. It doesn't mean they get their old life back. It doesn't mean, as my friend Paul said, it's worth it. But in my experience, almost universally, I can't think of a person who's been through something really painful that hasn't learned to be a better, kinder friend, him or herself. You know, about 2 years ago, I was at a think tank with a bunch of Orthodox rabbis. I was the only Reform rabbi there. And I was definitely a curiosity for them. And I was sitting at a table at lunch. It was at one of these kosher resorts in New Jersey. So obviously, I couldn't eat any of it because it was so horrible.
That sounds oxymoronic, by the way.
Horrible.
That sounds oxymoronic. A kosher resort.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, well, we were talking over this lunch, and one of the guys, he's a dean at Touro College, he turned to me and he said, "So, how are you different since your surgery?" And without hesitation, I said, "I'm nicer. I don't think I was a jerk before, but I'm nicer." And he told me the following insight. So the Bible says God puts, in this case his, but we know that God has no gender, God puts God's words on our heart. And the sages ask, why on our heart and not in our heart? Certainly God has the power to put God's words in our hearts. Why does God place them on our hearts? And the answer the sages give is that it isn't until our hearts are broken that the words can enter. And this has been, in my experience, almost universally true of people who are suffering. They forevermore have a deeper sense of kinship with others who suffer. But again, that doesn't mean they aren't depressed. It doesn't mean they aren't broken. And also, I think one of the things that religion does is it gives us the long view. You know, it takes a long time to heal, depending upon the issue, a long time. And so that's part of it too. I would, urge you, whoever it is you may have in mind, that they're in the middle of a journey. They're not at the end of a journey. And sometimes it can take a long time.
Can I add something to that, Steve, right quick? I mean, he's the author, but your question has me thinking. I was in a conversation about something similar to this. Is it Scott? Scott. So the conversation about the other day with some people, Scott, and your question about why some people end up being, as Steve suggests, more beautiful than before, and some end up not as beautiful or even ugly after experiences. I always make a distinction between change and growth. And I'm so glad when I got Steve's book, I was so glad that he called that last section growing, not changing. It's surviving, healing, and growing, not changing. The point is that change is inevitable. Bernard Eigner wrote the great song, Everything Must Change. Change in our lives is inevitable, and I think that growth is optional. Change inevitable, but growth is optional. And in my experience, people don't make the turn, not because they aren't capable of changing. Again, everything changes, but they don't choose to grow through the experience. And so I was glad at your word choice that you call that last section growing and not changing, because they're not the same things.
And I think this is what Dostoevsky was getting at when he said his fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering. You know, you've suffered, now make something of it. Make something of your life for the price you have paid, accepting that it wasn't worth it, but neither is it worthless. And I think that's beautiful. And that's where this comes from.
Thanks, Scott.
Before we wrap up, I want to say something. Thank you, Scott. I want to say something to all of you. Actually, I want to say something to you, Tavis, in front of all of you, my friends and members of this great synagogue. Tavis and I have been friends for 30 years, and we love each other a lot. And he's an extraordinary person, and he's in a business where very often the goal is to keep everyone else out. And this book would not have been published had it not been for Tavis. Because when we started talking about it, he said, I'm going to talk to the people at Hay House, and this has to happen. The reason this book got published is Tavis Smiley, and I want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that, and this isn't false modesty. I made a phone call, but had your book been trash, it would not have gotten published. So it's a good book, and they were wise enough to see what a good book it is, and Hay House is very excited about it, and I'm excited about it. Yeah.
I want to make one more request. I rarely ask for anything. Again, you know I try to give, not take. But there is no way this book will get to the many people who it might help if you don't talk about it. Please talk about it. Go on social media if you like it. If you don't, like, stay off social media. But if the book moves you, please, please spread the word. Social media really matters. Emails really matter. Reviews on Amazon really matter. It's not easy if you're not a celebrity and it's not a diet book. It's really hard to get it out there, and I so hope this will be the book that people hand others instead of a bouquet of flowers. So please do what you can.
Can you mention your upcoming media appearances?
Wednesday morning, I don't know if it's showing Wednesday morning, I think it is. Wednesday morning, CBS Morning News, CBS Morning Show. I hope Charlie Rose does the interview, I don't know yet. And then the next week after that, The Talk, and lots of Sirius radio and podcasts. And I also want to say thank you to my friend Michael Solomon, who's sitting in the front row. Michael owns a company and a website called Truly, Truli. It's a portal for the Christian and particularly evangelical community. Michael is the one who taught me content is king, but distribution is emperor. So Michael is going so far out of his way to help me and to help this book enter the Christian community, and particularly evangelical community, where we have many differences, but the entire human family suffers. And it's an opportunity to bridge our two communities, which I know Michael feels very much in his heart. That's why he does the work he does. So I want to thank you too, Michael, for everything you're doing to help more beautiful than before see the light of day. Thank you. And Tavis, again, I love you and I thank you.
My pleasure. Yes, sir.
Okay. Last question.
I have an interesting question, Rabbi. So I have an interesting question, Rabbi. I know we're supposed to forgive and at the same time not forget. but yet, like, let's say we're driving down the freeway and we see something that reminds us of the whole situation. How are we supposed to deal with that when we've already forgiven?
It's impossible to forget. It's just impossible. And I don't think we should ask the impossible of ourselves. And I want to say another thing about forgiveness and forgetting. A little bit of guilt goes a long way. I mean this. A little bit of guilt, a little bit of shame. Don't try to rid yourself entirely of the shame or guilt for your past mistakes, because a little bit keeps you in your lane. You know, I got a new car and it has those warning things on the side view mirrors. They're fantastic. They keep you in your lane when you'd be in serious trouble if you pulled out of your lane. I think of guilt and shame that way. I've done things I feel terrible about. I've done the best I can to be a good person and make things right and change my life. But I still feel bad about it. But a little bit is okay because it prevents you from being that person again. So embrace that little bit that can't forget. Oops. Go ahead. Last one.
I have a question. So we're all here to buy your book and have you sign it. But for purposes of ratings, should we be doing a purchase on Amazon, or should we do it today, or should we do both?
Thank you, Mom. Yeah, we want comments on Amazon, but as long as you, like tonight, Chevalier's is selling the book, as long as it's purchased on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or at a bookstore, it all helps. And by the way, Tavis said something, really interesting about ratings and books, which is the New York Times thing is done by sales that week. So you could sell, and I won't, but you could sell 1 million copies of something, and if it's not all in 1 week, you don't get in the ratings. This isn't about the ratings, honestly. And if you read the publishing contract, you would also know it's definitely not about money. I spent the advance on publicists, and you don't make any money until you pay back the advance. So I'm sort of paying them to publish the book. But I believe in this. I really believe I am that guy who runs toward trouble.
Those Amazon reviews to your question are very important. So when you read the book and you like it, go on Amazon and just do a review of it. Just if it's a sentence or two, whatever. Those things add up. When you see those ratings, when you see those reviews, the reviews lead to more stars lead to more sales. So when you get the book and read it, go on Amazon, and at the very least, even if you don't purchase it there, go on Amazon and review of the book. That's a big deal.
And please tell your friends.
Thank you, Rabbi Leder, for sharing your wisdom with us and the world.
And thank you, Rabbi Nanis. I really want to thank Rabbi Nanis, who did this with love. So thank you, Susan, for everything. I'll see everyone outside in a couple of minutes.